Well, we're here with the results of the 21-22 deer season. This particular buck here is a typical 8, young 8, and we shot that on the last day, which would have been the 4th of December 2021, and we shot it right at the last half hour of legal light. It's not an overly big deer for Iowa, but he's a trophy in the sense that you took him in the last 15 minutes of the season with a bow and arrow, and he's, 2.5, 3.5 at the most, as far as I would say. I don't really know because I'm not a scientist, and it's just a guesstimation. But he was a nice, symmetrical 8-pointer. And the coyotes really loved him, as you've seen in the previous video. Now, this is the buck that we shot on the, it would have been the 7th of January in 2022, in the late season. You could be muzzleloader hunting or archery hunting. And he would have been a real nice symmetrical 10-pointer, and on November 2nd we have a picture of him where this tine is on at the mock scrape stand, and he had several stickers coming off of his right side, which was sort of unique. His bases were over 5 inches, 5 2/8 bases, so he did have quite a bit of mass, and his brow tines were 5 inches long, but his rack was on the decline. Now, what we're going to do, this was his jawbone, and his front incisor was basically gone. His molars are somewhat wore down, and there's some people I watch on YouTube, they talk about how to measure deer age by the molar. But here is one that I killed several years ago, and you can tell those molars are really wore down. His front teeth were completely gone, and this deer was in the mode, he couldn't digest his food because he couldn't chew his cud because how wore those molars are. That's the most worn down molars I ever seen. And these molars are nowhere close to that, as you can see, side by side comparison. But this deer had missing incisor, so it does have a considerable amount of wear, and the incisors wore down quite a bit. That's the front 2 teeth. Now, I'm no expert, so I'll be the first to admit that. I'm going to try to proclaim that you can tell much, because this was shot in a rock quarry where its food had a lot of limestone in it, and that could entice the grinding down of the teeth quicker. But as before, I'm going to send these off to have it scientifically scored. And this is out of Missoula, Montana. It cost around $100, but all people are going to be shocked. $100. Well, I would rather know the age of that deer and the deer that are running around on my property than have somebody scribble a worthless tattoo on my arm. So it comes with the complete package. It comes with the instructions. It tells you exactly how old the deer was by cutting the teeth in two and then staining them, putting them under a microscope, and getting the growth rings. And like I said, this deer age is what they go by, and they could have these results back to me within a week, and all the information is on it. Deb can put that on there, so if you're interested, you can contact these people. Now, being as this one tooth was gone, I'm going to saw this front off. They say to saw it off and just send that in, because they got to have the root and everything, and they go over how to do that in this manual of sawing the front teeth off if they're that aged. So I'll get that done, then we'll get the results back, and then we'll know how old this 10-pointer, because I think he was way past his prime. So, and like I said, if you get a deer that has wear on its molars like that, you know it's an old deer, but you don't know how old it is. But that's the oldest buck I've shot in Iowa, and it was on the decline. So just don't go by what ifs and what ands. Man up, woman up. $100 bill's not a whole lot of money today, and it's getting less and less. Right here's the people that get a hold of age your deer, most accurate way of doing it, and they can get that to you, and then you'll know for sure, and there won't be any questions of what ifs and what ands. And the nice thing about it, you'll know the age of the deer structure in your neighborhood, because they're not your deer, and you'll know what the age structure is in the area that you're hunting. So get a hold of these people and put the aging question to rest, and we'll share the results of this later on when we get them back. We got the deer age back. We sent it in a week ago and got it back yesterday. And after doing the scientific staining of the growth rings, the buck that was shot on January 7th of 2022 was aged at 7.5 years old. And it has quite a bit of mass going for it. And I knew by the teeth wear it was quite worn down. And the mass on the base on this left side, if we measured that, was 5 3/8. That's pretty good mass. And the unique thing about it was the length of the skull itself. And how I come about that is I measured that with this apparatus here. Now I knew the skull was pretty big, and as I measure it with my bear, this is what I measured bear skulls with, and that came out from the back of the base of that skull level. It was a good, it came out, I had the measurement wrote down here, it was 12 5/8 long. That's pretty long. And then if you measure the width, you do the same thing, and you go to the widest point, and you slide this up there, right to the widest point of the skull, and that widest point it came out to be 5 and, let's see, what was that? It was 5 1/8 wide. Now, it was pretty big. The width was quite, the skull itself was big. And this was the deer that I shot. This was the one I shot in 2019. And the skull length of it was 12 2/8 long for that same measurement, and it was 5 inches wide. This came back at that time. This was 19 buck, as we know, it was 6.5 years old, and this particular buck that we shot in 2022 on the 7th was aged at 7.5 years old. And that's, the deer age system, how they stain the growth rings. And so that was pretty impressive, that this was a 7.5-year-old buck. Now, it was probably on the downhill side, and you can see it had some pretty nice stickers going on the base one on the back, two on the front. Those would have all been not abnormal points, and they would have all scored as a point. Had a lot of gnarly stuff going down here. But its teeth, as you've seen, were really on a downward. The front incisors were just horrible compared to this buck. Now, just to show you the difference in size of skulls, I have this. This buck was the one I shot in the last 15 minutes of the first archery season here in Iowa. And you can see how much smaller that skull was. I mean, it was quite a bit smaller, and because it was a lot younger buck. Had good genetics. Matter of fact, the thing about this buck is I would pretty much say that it had the same genetics of the buck, because I shot it. This buck was shot out of the same stand that I shot this buck out of. I shot this in 2019 on the last night of the hunting season, before gun season, and I shot this buck on the last night out of the same stand, which would have been, this was 2019, this was 2021. But you can see real characteristic. This was the same gene pool. I'm pretty sure that this could have been the father of this buck. And this buck here would probably be 3.5, possibly. I wouldn't know more than 4.5, because if this one was 6.5, you can see how much bigger it was. So, but far as similarity, and I have no idea proving that unless I did a DNA on, which you can do. You can have DNA drill into the, test drilled into the antlers, and take, they can actually come up with whether it was this was the father of this buck. But I just wanted to share that with you. I gotta get this guy down so I don't want him to fall down. If you measure up the left side against the left side, this buck at 7.5 had 60 5/8 inches of antler. This buck on the left side at 6.5 had 57 7/8 inches of antler. Now, naturally this was going to score higher. This buck had, on the inside spread, the inside spread was 17 inches, and this one that I shot this year on the inside spread was a mere 15. I knew this buck was going to be quite a bit older because of the size of the skull. This has a very big skull, and at 7.5 its skeleton was completely fully grown, but it was on the downhill side. So I just wanted to share that information with you, because there's so much more after the hunt and after the kill that you can learn from the animal that you've harvested. So wish you all had good luck this year, but if you really want to know that guessing game, that's all it is, because I would never assume that this was going to be a 7.5-year-old buck, and I didn't think this was a 6.5, but you pay the money and science is not supposed to lie. So like I said, it's worth it to send it off and have that if you really want to know what your deer herd is on your properties, to get a good example of what the age structure is. So that's it from the non-typical, and shed hunting is just around the corner.